Hey gentlemen, welcome to St. Joseph's Workshop. Today we're going to be talking about marriage. So I had a video recorded about my pocket journal, but I felt this on my spirit today to talk about the sacrament, um, which I'm new to. So I got married about 2 months ago. On the 14th, it'll be 2 months. But so yeah, let's get into it. All right. So marriage. So marriage is one of the seven sacraments. Um, and again, this is all based off of the Baltimore Catechism. If you guys are interested in picking one up, comment, email me. I'll find a way to send one over to you guys. But this is awesome. Honestly, it explains a lot of Catholic teachings and doctrines, and it has a lot of the red is all scripture that backs up the doctrine of the Catholic faith. So that's pretty neat. So when I was writing my wedding vows, I kept rereading the book of Genesis when God created Eve for Adam, right? And so it's so beautiful, right? And the way I see it is like that's when God created the first sacrament, right? And I say sacrament because before the fall of man, we didn't need special graces from God because there was no sin in the world, right? So when God gave Eve to Adam, it was just because Adam was lonely and was seeking, a companion on earth, right? Um, but it wasn't until the fall of man that that grace was needed. And so technically, even though it was marriage, they didn't need the graces, if that makes sense, right? But I still think it's interesting that, when God gave Eve to Adam, essentially, Adam writes the first, love song to his wife. It says, "And the Lord cast a deep sleep upon Adam, and when he was asleep, he took one of his ribs and filled up flesh for it. And the Lord God built the rib which he took from Adam into a woman and brought her to Adam. And Adam said, 'This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Wherefore a man shall leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be two in one flesh.'" So that's Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 24. Which, if you catch it, Adam, the first man, right, talks about leaving mother and father. When I first read that, I was a little confused. I was like, who's he referring to, right? If he's the first man, who's his earthly mother, who's his earthly father? So I was a little confused on that part, right? When I went to church and I talked to Sister Maria Regina at my local church, and she explained to me that Adam understood that there were going to be future generations. They had the foresight to see that he's the first of many. And so him saying, "Leave mother and father and cleave unto your wife," was him speaking not really from first account for himself, but for us, all the future generations. So he was able to see forward enough to realize, hey, I'm going to have kids, and my kids are going to have to leave me and cleave onto their wife. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But effectively, that creates, marriage. I always thought that was interesting, that that's the first ever mention or acknowledgement of what could be considered a sacrament in the Catholic Church, right? And upon speaking to my good friend Justin, again preparing for my own marriage and stuff, I mentioned to him this Bible verse that I just shared with you guys, and he mentioned to me that he always thought it was interesting that Christ's first miracle was at a wedding as well. And so to me, it was obvious, right? We all know that, the wedding at Cana. But it was a little bit of an epiphany too, where it's like, man, I didn't realize that the first miracle Christ performed was at a wedding with wine, which again, in the Catholic faith is very important, right? The real presence of the blood of Christ during the Mass. And so not only is that symbolic of the sacrament of marriage, but also a foreshadow of the real presence of Christ when the transubstantiation of the wine into the blood of Christ during the Mass. So that was very interesting as well. And so I say all that to say this: I really think marriage can save a lot of souls, both men and women, right? But right now I'm talking mostly to the gentlemen out there. I know a lot of us struggle with, lust, wandering eye, stuff like that. But marriage grants you a kind of grace that really helps you conquer those things, conquer those temptations. So I apologize if this video is a little all over the place. In the future, I'll make sure to do a better job of scripting and planning it out. But there are a few points that I want to touch on this video. So, which brings me to my next point. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul writes, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote to me, it is good for man not to touch woman, yet for fear of fornication, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband render to the wife her due, and likewise the wife to the husband. The wife has not authority over her body, but the husband likewise has not authority over his body, but the wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by consent for a long time, that you may give yourselves to prayer and return together again, lest Satan tempt you because you lack self-control." So I like this part as well. "But this I say by way of concession, not by way of commandment. For I would rather that you were all as I am myself, but each one has his own gift from God. One is in this way, and another in that." All right, so what does that mean? So at the beginning, Paul is basically writing that marriage is encouraged between man and woman to avoid fornication, so sex outside of marriage, right? And then he says the wife has not authority over her body, but the husband. So the husband has authority over the wife's body. But now the wife also has authority over the husband's body. So what does that mean? So essentially that doesn't mean, hey, you don't have self-governance, right? So as a married man, I still decide, what I do, right? I'm not my wife's slave. She's not my slave, right? But now I have to take care of myself for the sake of my wife, right? So my wife is very outdoorsy, very active, I'm a bigger dude, right? But if my wife tells me, "Hey, David, you need to eat healthier," right? I can't say, "No, I'm my own person, blah, blah, blah." Now, because we entered in a union with God, she can now tell me how I need to take care of my own body, right? As long as it comes from a godly place, right? You need to listen to your spouse. So again, wives, if your husband tells you, "Hey, you need to stop doing X," right? As long as it comes from a, a godly place, right? From fear of the Lord, you need to submit, right? So in a way, although the men are the heads of the household, they still need to submit to a sense, to a degree, to their wife. So in the next part, it says, do not deprive each other, except perhaps by consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to prayer, right? So what that means is, don't deprive each other. So don't say, you know what, I'm not gonna blank with you because I'm mad at you. And I'm not even gonna kiss you because blank, right? Don't do that to each other, because you're just handing your spouse to temptation, to the enemy, right? But it says, except perhaps by consent. So when the wife and the husband both consent to, hey, um, you know, I really want to be in the grace of God for example, for Lent, 40 days. 40 days is a long time. It's going to be very difficult, right? But there's a plan. After 40 days, I would say we can continue in our marriage, consummating the marriage. But for 40 days, that's our game plan, right? But there's a plan there. It's not just, hey, we're, you know, depriving each other until whenever. That doesn't work in a marriage, because you're just handing temptation to your spouse, right? But then Paul writes, return together again, lest Satan tempt you because you lack self-control. So again, a lot of us, right, are not called to be virgins. We're called to be mothers, fathers, husbands, and wives, right? And even Paul continues to write, but this I say by way of concession. So conceding, what does it mean to concede? So for example, I grew up playing soccer. If you concede a goal, that means you have something against you, right? You gave one up. You gave up a point. So Paul's saying, I'm giving up this point to you guys. It's not a commandment, but I know fallen human nature. And so I'm conceding this point, right? That you guys need to get married to avoid fornication. He continues to say, for I would rather that you all were as I am myself, which Paul was a virgin. So he's saying, I would rather everybody be a virgin, abstain, right? Following the example of Christ, because Christ was a virgin. And so, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this way and one in that. So that's where the discernment comes in, right? Are you meant to be a virgin, a priest, a nun, or a, single layman, a single parishioner, live the single life, right, in chastity, or be married and have kids and be able to consummate your marriage, right? Have relations with your wife and only your wife and only your husband. So that's where the discernment comes in, and that's what Paul's talking about there. And so touching on another point, divorce is completely forbidden in the Catholic Church, right? There are instances where a couple is allowed to live separately, but they're still married to each other, right? So how would that work? So you would live in separate houses, but neither person in that marriage is allowed to remarry or have relations with another person. That would be fornication. That would be infidelity in the eyes of the church, right? So even if you and your spouse decide to live separately, that doesn't allow for you to get married outside of that. You still have spousal responsibilities to each other, even if you're living separately. But divorce shouldn't even be in the conversation, right? If you discern your future partner wisely enough, prudently enough, that shouldn't even be in the conversation, right? So now, for the younger men out there, how do you discern a good wife, right? Well, the most important thing is that she's a God-fearing woman. If she fears God, she's going to fear sinning against God. And if she doesn't sin against God, she's not going to sin against you, for lack of a better term, right? So as a man, if you have a fear of the Lord, you have a fear of infidelity, a fear of lying, a fear of stealing, a fear of disappointing God, right? And then seeking God's approval, you can't help but be a good husband, but be a good father, right? Because you fear the Lord. It's not because I fear my wife or I fear my kids. It's because God requires that of you, right? And so if you're dating, you got to make sure that one, you're waiting till marriage. That's the most important thing, right? Because if you don't wait until marriage, you have a soul tie with this person. And it's very difficult to break that, right? And so that's one reason. Two is if you're on a date with somebody, right? You're getting to know them, you're going out on a few dates, and inevitably the conversation will come up, the conversation of sex, right? And you say right off the bat, I'm waiting until marriage. Immediately, that's going to weed out the people you don't want to be with. Sadly enough, in this world, there's going to be a lot of people who are turned off by that, and they'll stop talking to you, right? Oh, you're a religious nut. You're a Bible thumper. No one waits till marriage these days. They're going to say that to you, but that's going to weed out the people you don't even want to be with in the first place, right? So if you say, hey, I'm a God-fearing man, I'm waiting until marriage, nothing's going to convince me otherwise. If the person stays, if she's like, oh, okay, cool, it's worth pursuing, right? But if they say, oh, that's antiquated thinking, nobody waits until marriage these days, blah, 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 they're not worth it. They're not worth your time. Let them leave, right? But if someone respects you enough to say, you know what, maybe I don't agree with that, but I respect that. I don't mind waiting until marriage. Okay, you can continue, right? And there's still a bunch of other things, but that's one way where you can immediately discern, or they'll discern themselves out of your life, right? And that'll help you decide whether or not a person is worth continuing dating. So going back to your own salvation, right? I'm not saying get married if you're not ready to be married. What I am saying is don't be afraid of marriage. Don't be afraid of entering in that union with God and a good godly woman or a good godly man. It's a little intimidating, but it'll grant you so many graces. So there you go. I'm sure there are some things that I probably missed that maybe some people need clarification on, but feel free to let me know in the comments what it is that you guys would want to learn more about. If I missed something, if you have further questions on something I touched, feel free to let me know. Feel free to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.